Hi, 7th grade. Welcome back. Today is Monday, and this week we're going to continue working on Renaissance and medieval architecture. We're going to start looking at sculpture, and then we're going to be finishing up with art next week. Today we're going to go over a number of things, so the video will be a little slightly longer because we are also going to be doing the reading together. Let's go over the exit ticket from Friday. So this is what the data looks like. So, when did Gothic architecture first appear in Europe? Gothic architecture appeared in the 11 and 1200s. Okay, that was like the height of the Gothic period. By the 1300s, they were already developing Renaissance architecture. That does not mean that they stopped developing Gothic architecture, but by the 1300s, there was already the Renaissance period starting. Which of the following is a Gothic arch? Let's look at the picture. So the Gothic arch is, you'll see that the telltale sign is that it's a pointed arch. You see how this arch is like it looks like a pointed arch. This one is a rounded arch. This is a Roman, ancient Roman arch. Okay, so the Gothic is this one. We're gonna go over that in a second. By the way, only 90 students took the exit ticket, which is concerning. Which European country is mostly closely associated with Gothic architecture? Is the country where it first developed, and that is France. You might have wanted to pick Italy, but it was France. So if you want to go look at some of the most magnificent Gothic architecture, go to France. We're going to go over an example in a second. The term Gothic was not used to describe this architecture until the Renaissance. The answer is true, right? They gave this term to this type of architecture as a almost like an insult. It's very Gothic, barbaric, backwards, too much, right? So people that lived during the 1100s, they didn't say we're doing Gothic architecture. They just called it architecture, modern architecture. Which of the following allow for Gothic churches to be tall, with thin walls and a lot of stained glass, and that is the use of the flying buttress, and we'll talk about that, what that is. A buttress is something that helps support, and in this case it's a flying buttress because it's not exactly against the wall sometimes. Which of the following is most likely a Gothic church? Most of you guys got that question right. The Gothic church is the one that's the most flamboyant, the one that has these arches. You see these things here? You really can't see them because I can't write this. This is from ancient Rome. This is from the Middle Ages. This is called Romanesque. This came before Gothic, so you know. And then this is Renaissance, mainly the dome, which is the top part. Okay, let's look at the last questions. Which of the following most likely, we did that one already. Which of the following is a flying buttress? And again, the flying buttress is is this part. You see these middle things in the middle, the ones that are like hanging on the side? That's the flying buttress. And it allows for the church to be taller, but not necessarily have a wall on it, so that it can have more light. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. And the last question. The architects and engineers of the Renaissance used the term Gothic to describe something not beautiful. They didn't find it beautiful or tall, skinny. They might have said that, but that's not why they called it Gothic. Barbaric is something that is like without culture, something that is, ugly, unattractive. Okay, so that's that. So I'm going to be making some notes here. So this is a Gothic church. So I'm going to be going over a lot of images, and I'll tell you what period this is from. Okay, so this is a Gothic church. I don't know exactly the name of it, but if we zoom in, we're able to see. I'm going to use red so you can see it better. We're able to see the pointed arches there. We're able to see the pointed arch here. Pointed arches. Again, that's a telltale sign, okay? That's the arches. You also have a lot of glass, a lot of stained glass. And you'll see, like this one, you'll see what the purpose is. This is the flying buttress. I'm going to circle them. That's a flying buttress. There's one back there. There's these. This allows for the church to be really tall, right? These flying buttresses are not necessarily for show. I mean, they do look really pretty, but it is to support the walls, right? A lot of the force is coming this way. So this guy supports this wall through the flying buttress. Okay, the flying buttress is just there to support the walls because they are skinny and really tall. Again, this is Gothic architecture. And you see how how flamboyant it is, how much detail it has. I find it really, really beautiful, but people in the Renaissance did not. This is a lot of the stained glass that was in these churches was there to show scenes of the Bible. Many people, most people during the Middle Ages still could not read. So they were able to learn about the Bible through the scenes in the stained glass. Okay. So again, these are Gothic churches. That does not mean that Renaissance churches do not have stained glass. They just have less. Here's a perfect example of what a flying buttress is. Here you have, this is the flying buttress right here. Okay. So again, a buttress is something that supports something, right? And in this case, it looks like it's flying because it's in the air. So this is another example. Here's the stained glass again. They have these like spirals. Erase that. So here's another example of, again, this is Gothic. Here's another example of stained glass. Very beautiful. And again, it teaches people to it teaches people about the Bible. A lot of the stained glass did include scenes like these because people needed to be aware of what might happen if you don't follow church teachings. Gargoyles are also on these. If you've seen a movie called The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Notre Dame is a very, very famous Gothic church in France, and I'll talk about it in a second. They have gargoyles as well. So this is Notre Dame Cathedral. About 2 years ago, it actually caught fire and a lot of the roof burnt down. So it is in the process of being reconstructed. It is one of the most magnificent examples of Gothic architecture. Again, Gothic is a term developed by people of the Renaissance to describe this type of architecture, which they did not particularly like. Okay, so Gothic develops in the 1100s. Okay, I'm gonna make a little timeline here. So here we have the classical period. And the classical period, if you remember, is Greece and Rome. Here we have the Middle Ages. And here we have the Renaissance. This is 500 BCE. This is 500 CE. This is 1300s CE, and all the way to the 1600s for the Renaissance, right? So the Gothic period is about here. Okay, this is the Gothic period. There's other developments that happen in the Middle Ages. I'm not going to talk about them. This is the classical period, and this is the Renaissance. Remember, Renaissance means rebirth. So that's the Gothic period. During the classical period, there's a lot of architecture that happens in the classical period. I'm going to talk about Greece and Rome, right? Particularly the architecture of Greece and Rome. The big thing you need to get out of Greece, in Greece, when I say Greece, I do not mean like fats or lard. I mean like Greek, like ancient Athens, mainly ancient Athens and ancient Sparta, but we're talking about ancient Athens. The Greeks developed these magnificent columns, okay? These are columns, right? You don't see those in the Gothic period. Gothic periods don't have these necessarily, right? The Greeks developed these amazing columns. The top of the column is known as the capital. This is the capital, and this is the base. Okay, the capital is the top, the base is the bottom. The Greeks developed these columns with different capitals. This is called Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Let me make sure I have those correct. Doric columns tend to be, yeah, this is a Doric one. Okay, this is Doric, this is Ionic in the middle, and this is Corinthian. I particularly like Corinthian. It's very, very, very fancy. And that's what they put at the very top. Okay, this is called the Parthenon. It looks like this today, like this one. It was a temple dedicated to the goddess Athena. On the left, you see how it might have, how it looks today. On the right, you see how it looked, how it might have looked back then. Okay. Again, on the left, you see how it looks today. It's a ruin. On the right, how it might have looked back then. It's about 2,500 years old. It's really old. But you will see that this type of architecture appears in the Renaissance. So this is what it might have looked like. Okay. These are the columns that they used. So this is Greece. This is the same building, Greece. The Parthenon. It's in, I think it's in Quizlet. And these are the columns that they use. Okay. Again, columns are like pillars. This is ancient Rome. This is called the Pantheon. This is called the Parthenon. Parthenon. This is the Pantheon. The Romans borrowed techniques from the Greeks. They borrowed building techniques from the Greeks, but they also developed their own techniques, right? The Greeks came before the Romans. The Romans borrowed techniques from the Greeks, but they also developed their own idea. The big thing that they developed was this use of the dome. Okay, a dome is like a, it's like a roof. It's a semi. It looks like a semicircle. It doesn't have to necessarily be that semicircle, but this is their big contribution. The Romans developed this idea of the dome. Okay, this is called the Pantheon. I was there some time ago. It's an amazing building. This building is this dome was actually one of the largest domes in history without having metal. It doesn't have any metal in it. It's all made out of concrete. Okay, so that's what it looks like from the top. And this is what it looks like from like on ground level. So the dome is up here somewhere. You can see the very top up there. Okay, but you see these columns. These columns are things that they borrow from the Greeks. Now they didn't actually go to Greece and take these columns. No, the knowledge of these columns they developed, they learned from the Greeks. I can't write on this. My thing froze. My pencil's dead. Why did it die? Yeah, my pencil's dead. So that's okay. So the Romans borrowed these columns, this idea of the columns from the Greeks. Okay, and they created this building, and then they added this huge, amazing dome. You're still able to visit that in Europe today. Okay. Okay, let's move on to this one. This is another Roman piece. You see the columns? Oh, there you go. You see the columns? And you also see a strategy that they use. They developed this arch. You see, this is not a pointed arch. The reason I'm telling you this is because the people of the Renaissance, remember, they want to recreate the classical period, so they're going to borrow a lot of these strategies or these techniques from the Greeks and the Romans. Here in the background, you see the Colosseum. You're able to see the arches. So far, we talked about the column. We've talked about the dome and also the arches. Here's a Roman aqueduct. Here you see the arches again. No columns here. You see the rounded arch. Right? The aqueduct actually is at the very top. That's what the aqueduct is. Okay. And then we get to the Renaissance. And remember, the Renaissance are trying to study the classical text, study classical architecture, study classical sculpture, and be influenced by it. So this building is interesting because this one is called Santa Maria del Fiori. You will need to know this one. This building was created during the medieval period, towards the late medieval period, but this dome was not. Right, it was a dome that they tried to build, or they were trying to figure out what to do with this, and they couldn't. It wasn't until I think the late 1300s when a man by the name of Filippo Brunelleschi, this is a very, very important person. You will need to know him. He was able to construct this dome, and this dome was one of the largest in the world as well. It is solely made out of like bricks. It's an immensely large dome. He is also one of the people credited with developing linear perspective, of giving depth, 3 dimensions to images, to paintings. So this one's called Santa Maria del Fiori. It is located in France, and it is influenced by the Roman dome. Okay. Here's another one. This one was made in the 1400s. This is probably the most important building in the Catholic religion. It is located in Rome. I never visited this one, but I did visit this one. I lived really close to this building when I was in Rome. This one's called St. Peter's Basilica. This is a church, Catholic churches. And this was built in the 1400s, and it was designed with Roman and Greek influences. If I can zoom in here, you're able to see the columns, and you're able to see the capital and the base. The capitals looks like they're Corinthian. Looks like they're these. Looks like it's this one. Okay, Corinthian. You're able to see that. You're obviously able to see the arches. This pen is too thick. You're able to see the arches. But the biggest thing is you're able to see the big dome. Okay, so Renaissance architecture looks nothing like, it looks nothing like this. This is Gothic, and then we have Renaissance. And the biggest example of Renaissance architecture is, or the biggest telltale sign is the columns, the arches, and obviously the dome. Okay, so these two are two images that you will need to know. Santa Maria del Fiori and Saint Peter's Basilica. This one is located in Rome, and this one is located in Florence. Okay, so Gothic architecture. Let's go over some examples, some details. So Gothic architecture has pointed arches. It has some of them have flying. I think that's spelled buttresses. I'm not sure. Flying buttresses. A lot of stained glass. Really skinny and tall. Okay. Classical architecture. It depends, right? For the Greeks, you can talk about column. The Greeks also did, they did a lot of work on very straight lines. Very straight lines, okay? If you look at the Parthenon, that's what you see a lot of, okay? Very straight lines. Okay, column. And for Rome, you have the column. You still have columns that they borrow from the Greeks. You have columns. You have arches, and you have the dome. So if you want to look at Renaissance architecture, you have the same, right? Columns, arches, dome. Okay. You will see that a lot of the buildings in Roman in the Renaissance are kind of like this. They're kind of made into like a T, like a cross. Okay. Filippo Brunelleschi, big person. He's an engineer. He is an artist. And pretty much a scientist, right? He develops the concept of perspective. That's the idea that where you give a sense of depth to something, like a sense of 3 dimensions. I can show. We're gonna focus more on him when we focus on arts. But right now, his biggest contribution is the dome of Santa Maria del Fiori. Okay, that's his biggest contribution. So I'm going to give you guys some images on your exit ticket and ask you if they are Renaissance or medieval. I'm sorry, Renaissance architecture or Gothic, and you're going to have to tell me why. Okay? Let's go over this text. I like this website. During the Renaissance, architects began to look back at the Roman and Greeks for inspiration when designing buildings. Much of Renaissance architecture style was taken from ancient Rome and Greece and then altered to fit the current lifestyle. So if you look at a building from the Renaissance, you're like, is that Renaissance or is that classical? Because they look very similar. Filippo Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi was considered the first Renaissance architect. Some historians consider the start of the Renaissance to be 1419, when he won the commission to build a dome above the Cathedral of Florence. So he built it in 1400s, actually. I was wrong. So this is the cathedral. The dome was an ambitious undertaking, as it was the largest dome built since the Pantheon. The Pantheon. Remember the Pantheon? This is the Pantheon. This guy right here. So this dome was actually the largest dome built. This dome was the largest dome built since this dome. Okay. Moving on. The dome was an ambitious undertaking, as it was to be the largest dome built since the Pantheon in ancient Rome, which had been built 1,500 years earlier. The entire dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, including the lantern at the very top, would take much of Brunelleschi's life to complete. The gold ball at the top weighed nearly 2 tons by itself. It took over 4 million bricks to construct the dome. Brunelleschi also had to invent a new way of lifting heavy objects high into the air, which would later be used by other architects. Brunelleschi also designed 2 churches in Florence. You're more than welcome to look at these. The Church of San Lorenzo and the Church of Santo Spirito. These churches were built with symmetry and order. Many more churches throughout Europe will mimic or copy this basic design in the coming years. Features of Renaissance art. Renaissance architectures or features of Renaissance buildings, Renaissance architecture had some distinct features that were nearly common to major construction. The square. Many buildings were built as square or rectangle, symmetrical shapes. The front or facade. Oh, that's a hard one. Facade of the building were generally symmetrical around a vertical axis. Columns. They used Roman-style columns. Arches and domes. Arches and domes were popular. This was again taken from Rome and Greek architecture. Ceilings. The ceilings of buildings were generally flat. Previously, the Middle Ages, ceilings were often left open. Examples of some of the Renaissance buildings are Basilica of St. Peter. You'll need to know that one. The Sistine Chapel. You'll need to know that one, but for a different reason. And that's it. Let's watch this one, then we'll be done. Actually, we have one more after this one.
The Renaissance architecture style originated in Florence in the early 15th century and then spread throughout Europe, replacing the medieval Gothic style by the end of the 16th century. Renaissance architecture marked a rebirth of classical culture, using many ancient Roman forms, including the column and round arch, the tunnel vault, and the dome. Renaissance architects studied the theory and practice of their Roman predecessors. They read the treatise On Architecture by Roman architect Vitruvius and examined ancient ruins in Italy, France, and Spain to develop their style. Classical antiquity and Renaissance architecture used order, a system of traditional architectural elements, as the basis for design. 5 orders were used during the Renaissance: the Tuscan, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and Composite.
So you need to only know the Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian.
Architects of the early Renaissance used the ornate Corinthian order the most, while the simple and strong Doric was more prevalent during the High Renaissance. Renaissance architects sought to achieve beauty through proportion, as classical architects had before them. This characteristic differentiates the Renaissance style from the Gothic. Interest in proportion also led to the pictorial device of perspective, first formulated by the Florentine architect.
Here, this is perspective. We'll talk about it. You can tell that this thing on the back is in the background. It's a sense of 3 dimensions.
Filippo Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi was one of the pioneers of early Renaissance architecture in Italy. His most famous work is the dome of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence. Also called the Duomo, this building took 16 years to construct. Early in his career, Brunelleschi lived in Rome, The Pantheon interested him greatly, causing him to study the
So here's the Pantheon. We talked about this. This was made in 27 BC. It wasn't finished until much later, but you see examples of Greek influence through the columns, but you also see the dome in the back.
engineering of its dome. Brunelleschi applied what he had learned from the Pantheon to the construction of the Duomo. He made the dome self-supporting, employing machines that he invented for the project, including the world's first reverse gear. Brunelleschi also used pillars for structural support rather than ornamentation alone for the first time since the Romans. Leon Battista Alberti was another influential mind behind Renaissance architecture in the 15th century. His 10 books on architecture became a Bible for the craft. Alberti created the facades of the Santa Maria Novella and the Palazzo Rucellai, both in Florence. These facades are noteworthy for their proportionality and perfect sense of measure. The beginning of the 16th century saw the development of the high Renaissance style of architecture, which heralded harmony, clarity, and repose. Donato Bramante introduced this style with works such as the Rectory of Sant'Ambrogio and the Church of Santa Maria del Grazie, both in Milan. The Tempietto at San Pietro in Montorio, his first Roman masterpiece, is a centralized dome structure that recalls classical temple architecture. Bramante also served as the first architect of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome until his death in 1514.
St. Peter's Basilica had multiple architects, and one of them was actually Michelangelo.
The late Renaissance, also called Italian Mannerism, spanned from 15 complexity and by Giulio Romano sophisticated liberties with classical architectural vocabulary.
One here. And then we have this one. There's a really long documentary that I might assign. It's like 50 minutes long, and it's on the Medici family. It's called Godfathers of the Renaissance. If you want to take a look at it, I'll see. But and they talk a lot about the Medicis, and they also talk a lot about Santa Maria del Fiore and the dome.
Imagine this. Imagine this. It's 1418 in Florence, Italy. You've been challenged to build a great dome for the Santa Maria del Fiore, one of the grandest cathedrals.
So this is what it looked like, right? Up until when it was the dome was built. It was exposed.
Ever built. And you have no formal architectural training. No pressure, right? For Filippo Brunelleschi, a goldsmith and clockmaker, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He considered the challenge carefully. Then proposed a daring plan, using methods that experts don't fully understand even to this day. At the time, domes were often built as semicircles. But the town fathers required that Brunelleschi build an 8-sided dome that would be even taller and stronger. It would also have no central support system to hold it up during construction. Even worse, the dome's base was an imprecise octagon with no true center. But Brunelleschi had that covered. There would be 2 domes instead of one, an inner and an outer shell, held together by giant brick arches and interlocking rings of stone and wood. The rings would work like hoops on a barrel, keeping the dome from expanding outward. To move heavy loads hundreds of feet up, Brunelleschi designed ingenious new machines, including an ox-driven hoist and massive lifting devices far ahead of their time. So, revolutionary design? Check. Groundbreaking engineering? Check. Can-do attitude? Check. But with no central support system, how would he actually build it? First off, the masonry would have to support itself during construction. To do this, Brunelleschi placed the bricks in an herringbone pattern, which spiraled to the top of the dome, with vertical bricks acting as bookends to hold the others in place. They laid about 1 row a week, giving the mortar time to cure. At this rate, the dome grew at a snail's pace of about a foot a month. But perhaps most puzzling is how he was able to place the bricks with such precision. Many experts agree that he used guide ropes. One theory states that ropes ran from a flower pattern on the work platform that showed exactly where the bricks should go. Another has ropes running from the dome's center, tracing a series of cones that grew smaller as they ascended to the top. Still another suggests a different arrangement of central ropes and wooden templates. However it was done, it worked. The 8 faces of the dome met at the top precisely, just as Brunelleschi had planned. In all, it took 16 years to complete the dome. When he died in 1446, Brunelleschi left behind no sketches and no details as to exactly how he achieved his masterpiece. Today, it remains the largest masonry dome in the world, more than 500 years after it was built.
We're in Florence and we're standing outside of the Duomo.
The Cathedral of Florence, and we're looking up at Brunelleschi's dome.
It's huge. Until St. Peter's, it was the highest dome that had ever been raised, and in its width, it was as wide as the Pantheon.
Almost.
If you think about the Duomo itself, had been planned in the 14th century.
The plan was to build a dome that had a span nearly equal to that of the Pantheon.
And of course, the Pantheon had been built in the ancient world, and that technology had largely been lost.
Right. So first and foremost, what Brunelleschi did was an amazing engineering achievement. The challenge was how to build a dome this wide without wooden centering. Generally, when you build an archway, and the dome is really just an arch
in the round,
you put up a wooden framework.
So this is the wood to actually support the dome until it can be locked in place by the keystone.
Exactly. So you don't even really need mortar to hold it together because you've got the keystone.
The problem is this was so big, they couldn't actually get enough lumber, and lumber that was strong enough to hold the thing up until they could lock it in place.
And so there was no way to do wooden scaffolding or centering to hold it up as it was being built. So how do you build this dome that inclines inward and not have it fall down?
There's two problems. You've got that issue, and then you've got the problem of it wanting to splay outward.
A dome exerts pressure not only down, but down and out. And so one of the biggest challenges is how to raise the dome and deal with that downward and outward pressure, not cracking the walls underneath.
Now, in the ancient world, for the Pantheon, for example, they had dealt with that by just creating sheer bulk. In other words, the walls got to be 10 feet thick.
I think actually in the Pantheon there's something like 20 feet thick of concrete. Right?
But Brunelleschi couldn't do that here. So what he's done instead is, first of all, he made the decision to make the dome as light as possible, and that means that it's basically hollow. It's a double shell, and within the shell is a staircase that snakes around that allows one actually to get to the top. And if you look, you can see people just below the lantern up at the top of the dome taking in the view of the city.
He also created ribs.
You're doing a lot of the weight bearing.
And then in between each of the major ribs, which are visible on the outside, there are
Ribs are these little white lines that come down from the top.
2 within that we can't see.
And those are actually locked in place by a series of horizontals as well. So there's this whole skeletal structure that's actually holding this piece together. I think most importantly, he was able to develop a system where as the dome was being raised up, as each course of stone and brick was added, it was actually locking itself in place, and so it was self-sustaining.
Another way that Brunelleschi dealt with the downward and outward thrust was to create chains inside the dome made out of stone and wood, locked together with iron, like a girdle to hold the dome in and to counter that downward and outward thrust.
You might think of an old-fashioned wooden barrel that has a couple of iron rings around it to help keep the wood together.
Brunelleschi created cantilevered scaffolding
that could rise as the building went up.
And so the workmen had a place to work. Brunelleschi also built new kinds of pulleys and hoists to bring up these heavy, massive pieces of stone to the top of the dome. So he created this ox hoist. There's just these remarkable machines that no one had ever seen before.
Very similar to what Da Vinci does in creating these inventions. But unlike Da Vinci, Brunelleschi's inventions actually were developed at this time, and he actually was able to use them to develop this dome.
He actually even designed a special barge to go down the Arno to be able to bring the materials to the city itself. If you think about the sheer quantity of material that had to be imported and had to be hoisted up and had to be put in place, it is just this remarkable project.
Bricks that had to be created, stone that had to be quarried and brought here, platforms for the workmen to work on, machines to hoist everything. And I think it was Alberti who said something like, what Brunelleschi did, we did
Without precedent.
without having any example to lean on.
Utter invention. Now,
Exactly.
we think that Brunelleschi may have gone to Rome and may have studied ancient architecture as well as sculpture there, but there is no precedent in the ancient world even for what Brunelleschi accomplished here.
Now, it's important to say that the dome is not hemispherical like the dome on the Pantheon.
It's actually kind of tall.
Right, it's kind of pointed. In a way, it has more of a Gothic shape than a classical shape, but in that way, it matches the Gothic church itself. If you look closely, you can see
Because the church itself is fairly Gothic because it's in the 12 and 1300s it was made, but the dome is not made until later.
these exedrae or blind tribunes that Brunelleschi added around the outside of the dome. They actually look very classical compared to the Gothic church. They, in fact, look like Roman triumphal arches. So there's this curious classical moment here in an otherwise very Gothic church.
And it's a church that is not only Gothic, but really referring back to the Tuscan Romanesque tradition, especially in terms of the polychromy, the colored marbles, which Brunelleschi also carries up into the barrel just below.
Okay, we'll stop here. Clarification, this is late Gothic, or this is a Gothic building, but the dome is made during the Renaissance. So this is like a combination of Gothic and Renaissance building because it does have the dome, but it does have some Gothic characteristics as well. Okay, please make sure to try to go for 75 on your video. If you don't, please let me know, or at least 70. If you don't do these videos, I most likely won't give you the quiz because you're not preparing for it. So please let me know how I can best support you. I'll talk to you guys later.